Hi, Alan.
Hi, Bob.
How you doing?
I'm doing very well. How are you doing?
I'm can't complain. Let me introduce us. I'm Robert Wright of Blogging Heads TV and Meaning of Life TV. You are Allan Lokos, and you are a meditation teacher. You've also written a book called Through the Flames: Overcoming Disaster Through Compassion, Patience, and Determination. Now, through the flames is no idle metaphor. You actually passed through flames. You were in a plane crash, you and your wife, in Burma or Myanmar in 2012. The plane burst into flames. You received third-degree burns over a fairly large portion of your body, large enough so that some doctors thought you would not survive. And what your book is about is how your past experience with mindfulness meditation helped you deal with this whole thing, including the crisis itself and the ensuing rehabilitation, which I think has succeeded beyond the expectations of almost anybody who was looking at your case at the time, right?
That is absolutely correct, and everything you said is correct.
Okay, so far, this is an error-free conversation. I'll try to keep it that way. Correct me if I fail to. Why don't you start by talking about the plane crash itself, what you experienced on the plane?
It was in Myanmar, as you said, or Burma, as it's probably better known. Christmas Day 2012, my wife and I were a combination of holiday, study, uh, getting a sense of what this nation is like that's just coming out of the rule of the generals and beginning to experience a more democratic life for its people. And we were having fun, we were having a good time. But on Christmas morning, this short flight that we took from Mandalay to Hilo crashed. On the way down, the plane, because it was off course, went through and sliced through electrical wires. Those wires sparked, the plane immediately burst into flames, and there was chaos inside the plane. There was an emergency exit that had popped open, but it was engulfed in flames. Yet it seemed to my wife and to me that that was the only way we were going to get out. We were pretty far back in the plane. So with her permission, I gave her a real push, and out she went through that emergency door. My intention was to follow right after her. But as things can happen, my foot got caught on something, and I couldn't see what it was because the plane was filled with this thick black smoke, and I was stuck literally in the flames. I don't know how long it took me to free my leg because that's the one blank spot I have in my memory. My trauma therapist calls that the gift of the benevolent brain. But I did eventually get free. I jumped from the plane. As you mentioned, I was badly injured, what they today call full thickness burns. They don't use the term third degree anymore. So full thickness, as the term suggests, means all the way through to the bone, to the tendon. I was seriously injured.
And
Um,
can we freeze frame a second? When you're on the plane, do you remember what your state of mind was like? I mean, there are clearly a few seconds you don't remember, but leading up to that, when I would think a lot of people were panicking, maybe people were panicking. What was there a sense of panic on the plane?
oh, there was tremendous panic and turmoil. And oddly enough, I do remember exactly what my state of mind was. I was terrified. I knew I was in fire. And at the same time, I felt calm.
Hmm.
And I know that sounds like an odd combination, but it's actually what happened.
Now,
Terrified because of the reality, and yet calm and able to do what I had to do to free myself.
and do you attribute that to your long experience with with meditation? The reason I ask is because people have varying reports of a crisis, and some people who aren't meditators say, "Wow, I surprised myself. I was able to focus. It was like time stood still." You hear these things. So I guess not everyone automatically starts screaming in situations like that. But do you have reason to believe that in your case, at least, it was the experience with mindfulness meditation and its attendant philosophy that enabled you to be so calm?
I do believe that, but I would say for sure that I can't prove that.
Mm-hmm.
I believe it because I think when you spend 20 plus years every single day, starting your day with, in my case, about 45 minutes of silence and watching what's going on within my mind, watching thoughts, feelings, watching physical sensations, it becomes part of what you do. In other words, you really become a more mindful person. So in that moment, I wasn't going to become another person. I was going to be a continuation of who I am and what I've developed,
And
but in an extraordinary circumstance, in a very dangerous situation, yet my mind was doing what it's been trained to do for so long.
and do you remember the experience having some of the elements of mindfulness? In other words, did you have kind of an awareness of the terror or the fear? Could you kind of see it in a sense without letting it get traction? Without letting it control you, which is kind of part of the idea of mindfulness. Do you remember that?
Yeah, that's exactly right. That a mindful person doesn't live in a state of bliss all the time. It means that whatever the state is that is going on at that moment, one is mindful of that situation, specifically mindful of your thoughts, mindful of your feelings or emotions, mindful of your physical sensations. So I was mindful of the fact that I was in big trouble, that I was in grave danger, that I was literally on fire. And at the same time, the instinct to want to live, that incredible pull that the human spirit, let's say, has to survive, was very present. And uh, because of the calm, and again, I acknowledge that strange juxtaposition between terror and calm, but because that calm was there and well practiced, I was able to do what I had to do to free myself. I can't tell you now what that was because I don't know. I don't remember. But I do know that my foot was caught and somehow I freed it and I got out. It might have taken as little as 10 seconds. It might have taken as much as 30 seconds. I asked the doctors who attended to me if they could estimate, and they said no, it wasn't really possible, but they said undoubtedly somewhere between 10 seconds and 30 seconds. That's a lot of time to be uh, in the kind of fire that's generated by jet fuel.
So you were prior to kind of losing or whether you lost consciousness or just don't remember it, we don't know for sure. But prior to that, you experienced terror without being gripped by terror and controlled by terror.
Yeah, I think that's an accurate way to say it. And that's a significant part of meditative practice or any other kind of contemplative practice. To be aware of the situation, to be aware of what our experience is internally and externally, and then to be able to respond to that as opposed to reacting, um, responding in our habitual ways, uh, reactive behavior that can leave us regretting afterwards. That's very much a core part of the practice. And of course, ultimately, in the traditional practice, we're looking to develop wisdom and compassion. Ultimately, let's say from the Buddhist perspective, it would be to free oneself from the experience of suffering.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so then comes a new series of challenges. You got out of the plane. You're on the ground. Some passersby, I guess, helped remove you from the immediate scene. But the original prognosis, once you came under medical care, was not good, right?
That's correct. The medical care in Myanmar is essentially non-existent. If I was Burmese, I would be dead. The Burmese doctor took a look at me and apparently just shook his head, nodding to my wife, saying, "No, there's no hope here." And he left and he never came back. My wife's truly heroic efforts got me out of Myanmar to Bangkok, but there the prognosis was the same. There was no way that I could survive these injuries. Then, again, through her extraordinary efforts, got me to Singapore, where there is a real burn unit. Most of the opinions there were that I wouldn't survive, but one extraordinary doctor didn't believe that. He's the doctor who did the first grafting and surgeries on me, and who also believed that the best thing for me was to be moved back home to the United States, and specifically to New York, where I live. And he helped my wife arrange that. It was a 30-hour medevac flight, which was a nightmare for her to put all the pieces together. But eventually I did land in New York. And immediately at the plane, the first doctor who looked at me said the same thing to my wife, which was, "I don't think we can save him."
What percentage of your body had the kinds of burns we used to call third degree and now call, as you mentioned, something else? What percentage of your body was burned?
33% full thickness burns. And they have a formula. They add that percentage to your age. If it gets near the number 100, you're in really big trouble. If it gets over 100, supposedly there's no way that you can survive. And I was well over 100.
You were.
Yeah.
I wouldn't have guessed that actually, but I'll take your word for it.
Yeah.
I'm sure you know as much about your age as anyone. So then you did. Now, do you think that even in this part of the recovery, let's set aside for a moment the subsequent challenge of recognizing that your life is not going to be the same life it was for a while at least, in dealing with that. But just if we focus on the immediate physical recovery that snatched you from the jaws of death, do you think that even there your meditative history helped?
Well, I would have to say yes, but I would also add to that I was supposed to be in ICU for 6 months.
Mm-hmm.
It turns out that I was completely out of the hospital in 2 months, and no one really had an explanation for that either. But at that point, I know now that my head was not clear at all. I would have guests visit me, and I knew who they were, and I could converse with them, but I didn't really have an idea of what was going on. So my head was not clear, and because of that, my attempts to get back to my meditation practice just didn't work. And that was upsetting to me because that's kind of been the bedrock of my existence for the last couple of decades. But in this tradition that I practice, teachers always have teachers. And although I am a teacher, I still have my teachers. And they wisely advised me that, no, this is not a time when one can meditate because you need your mind to be clear. Gradually, I was able to come back a minute at a time, then 5 minutes at a time, and ultimately all the way back. I added the practice of Tai Chi, which is a meditative practice. When I came home from the hospital, I couldn't walk very well. After the accident, I couldn't walk at all, and slowly learned how to get on my feet again, but my balance wasn't good. So Tai Chi for me was going to be about regaining balance. So now my routine is my Tai Chi form, which I've learned completely, and then into my regular sitting, and that's working well. So I'm back able to practice, but as I said, immediately after the accident, there was no meditative practice at all, yet it still was part of me. You know, you don't separate. I don't think we can compartmentalize the way we like to believe that we can. So it was there. I just couldn't actively practice.
Okay, so it was there in the sense that you had some capability to view your passing thoughts and feelings with less attachment than you might, and be a little less in their grips than you might have otherwise. Is that what you mean, or was it the case that at the beginning that was actually the problem? You couldn't do that. Your mind, you were so distraught and so consumed by concern that you couldn't get the distance you were accustomed to getting.
That's right. When I came home, there must have been a part of me that thought, this is it. This nightmare is over. Now I get back to my life. And it was not that at all. Coming home from the hospital was actually the worst part of this whole experience. All I could think about was, I want my life back. And I couldn't have that. I had no use of my hands. My hands were badly burned. They were encased in bandages. I was very weak. Even when the bandages came off, my hands trembled terribly. They were very sensitive. I couldn't do anything. I was essentially helpless. I couldn't feed myself, wash myself, wipe myself. I, as a person who gets a great deal of pleasure from giving, had to learn how to be a receiver, and that was difficult. I learned to do it. I learned to do it because I could see the joy in the faces of the people who were helping me. That helped me a lot. But that was the toughest stretch, trying to make this adjustment, deal with the fact that I had this constant yearning to have my life back the way it was. And with time, I guess I came to realize I was not going to have that life, but I could still have a very good life, which I do have. I do everything that I want to do now. Aside from the love of my family, and I shouldn't say aside from, because that's very significant to me. But I love to teach and I love to write, and I'm doing both again as I did before.
But there's still some constraints on things you can physically do?
Yeah, but very, very little. I mean, I can pick a dime up from a shiny surface.
Mm-hmm.
But then again, what's a dime worth today?
Yeah. Sometimes inflation is our friend, I guess.
Yeah, right. If it's a dollar bill, I can grasp it.
Yeah.
So, that works out. But there are little things, occasional little pains. But, when I get a pain in my hand, what comes to my mind is, wow, I still have hands. I came very close to not having hands at all. You can notice here, I don't know how much this shows, but it's a little bit of two-tone color right there. Now that's how close the fire came to my eye. Yet I have both eyes. I have friends who lost their sight. One lost in a war, another lost sight in an accident. It was a terrible thing to go through, but I consider myself incredibly fortunate. Mm-hmm. I'm very grateful.
Now, there are people who kind of amazingly manage to maintain that kind of positive attitude in the face of comparable traumas, who aren't meditators. I gather you attribute a little bit, at least, or some considerable part of your ability to do this to meditation. Talk a little about how meditation came back, kind of your capacity to meditate came back. What were the early phases like? What were the early signs that you were going to be able to regain this contemplative power?
Yes, and just before I do, I want to reiterate what you just said, because I think it's very important. My practice is meditation, but that's certainly not the only practice. In my book that you mentioned, Through the Flames, I interviewed a doctor in Kansas who was very close to death at that time. He had been diagnosed with terminal prostate cancer 11 years earlier and managed to live 11 years. And he's not a meditator, he's not a religious person, but a very good man. And he spoke to me about all he had learned in this time dealing with his own cancer, and how it really brought him a certain peace that he had never known in his life. And that was without meditation, without a formal religion, but with awareness, with with his own version of mindfulness.
Mm-hmm.
Now, in my case, as you mentioned, I'm a meditator. I gradually began to realize that I could stop for just one breath and bring my awareness to what it felt like to take one complete in-breath and out-breath. When I teach meditation, that's very much the way I start. Just get people to let the body become easeful and see if they can focus their attention on the sensations. In other words, what they feel as one breath enters the body and then leaves the body. And that's how I started for myself. Again, I put a little app into my computer called Time Out Free, suggesting you can get it for free. And it blanks out the screen. You can set it for whatever time limits you want. I set mine for every 20 minutes that it would blank out the screen for 20 seconds. And in that 20 seconds, that was all I needed just to draw in 2 or perhaps 3 breaths where I was not thinking about anything else. And that was the beginning of my coming back. As I said, also adding Tai Chi, which was very good for my concentration as well as balance. I found that learning the form was challenging, and if I didn't really concentrate on what I was doing, I wasn't going to be able to do the form. So I used all the tools that I could come up with to bring myself back so that I could practice again.
Do you still use that Time Out app, the computer app?
I do, absolutely.
So you think there's real benefit in that, aside from the role it played in your rehabilitation, just for regular people, every hour or so, just a pause of 20 seconds or something, stop and focus on a few breaths, and you think that brings real benefits?
I think even if you just stop, the idea of focusing on a breath, maybe that's going to strike some people as this foreign Asian thing, and I don't believe in that. You don't have to believe in anything. I mean, that's the great thing about meditation. You can believe in what you want. You don't have to believe in anything. But if you just stop, a friend of mine calls that the sacred pause, the pause in which you will not do any harm to yourself or to another. But just stop. We're so busy, all of us. I have friends who are retired, and now that they're retired, they say they're busier than ever, planning who they're going to go to lunch with, setting up a golf date, what movie are we going to see? So busy. The idea of stopping, it almost seems sacrilegious. How can you stop and do nothing? Stopping doesn't necessarily mean doing nothing. Stopping can mean stop and pay attention. What's going on within me? What is my experience right now of just stopping? Maybe I'm uncomfortable with it. Why is that? Why am I uncomfortable just taking a breath? It's okay to stop.
Yeah. Well, when I'm working, I'm very good at stopping, but I think in a different sense than you mean. I'm very good at having my mind wander rather than me continue to do work. But that's not what you're talking about.
No, we're not talking about procrastinating.
Right.
Although taking a nap is a great thing, but meditation and sleeping are not the same thing.
No. So what about the physical pain? You haven't talked much about that. Now, in kind of mindfulness philosophy and Buddhism, there's a kind of distinction made between the part of pain that is inherent, that is just going to be there, and the suffering that is not necessary if you take the right attitude toward the underlying pain, which isn't to say I think that you can eliminate all discomfort, but it is to say that some of the discomfort from pain is a function of how you're thinking about it.
Yes. Well, what we say is that pain and suffering are not the same thing at all.
Right.
Physical pain involves sensations. We don't know a whole lot yet about pain and how to really alleviate physical pain. There's a lot of good research going on right now in terms of brain mapping, etc. So we may be getting close, but chronic pain is just really difficult. And I get a little concerned when the idea is being put forth that meditation is going to alleviate physical pain. It certainly has not been my experience. It's not been the experience of my experienced colleagues. However, alleviating suffering is something very different. So one of the ways that this used to be taught was to speak about two arrows or two darts. If we're shot with an arrow, there's physical pain. We call that the first arrow. We create so often a second arrow. And that second arrow is when the first arrow hits, it's, oh, who shot that arrow? I want to know right now who shot that arrow. And then in the old traditional texts, it would become, and I want to know his lineage. I want to know his parents. I want to know who his teachers are. I want to know what kind of wood that arrow was made of. I want to know what kind of bird was used to make those feathers, and on and on. In the meantime, the doctor is saying, let's get that arrow out or you will die. So we do that, in a more contemporary setting. We're walking along, we twist our ankle, we fall, and it hurts. And that's legitimate pain. But as soon as the mind goes to, oh no, I have that big dance class tonight, and we're supposed to do a performance on the weekend, and everybody's going to hate me if I can't do it. And not only that, I'm going to work, and I'm going to be late, and I was late yesterday, and I'm going to lose my job. I lose my job. My wife is going to be furious because we're short of money now. And by the time you finish those scenarios, you're ready for the loony bin. But we have created everything other than the physical pain that arose when we twisted our ankle. What we create in those scenarios increases the pain. It increases it because we're tightening around it. That doesn't mean that there isn't physical pain, but without that second arrow, without the scenarios, that pain alleviates much more quickly. Maybe it needs medical attention, maybe it doesn't. If it does, we can see that more clearly. So being able to separate suffering from pain is very significant. Suffering we create. Pain happens.
And
I had physical pain with this accident. I don't think I created much suffering around it, which was very much to my benefit.
And what specifically are kind of the contents of the suffering that in your case did not materialize, or probably in some cases did materialize before you banished them? But I mean, what kinds of stories did you keep from telling yourself about your pain?
Well, one of the questions that came up very often would be, didn't you ever ask yourself, why me? Why did this happen to me? And the truth is that question never came up. I never asked myself, why me? And if I had, the only answer to that question would be, why not me? Who am I to be exempt from things that happen? And that's it. Things happen. I was never interested in blaming anyone. I don't think, now, officially it was pilot error, but I don't happen to believe that pilot wanted to crash that plane. I don't think he wanted to put his own life in danger, and I don't think he wanted to endanger anyone else. So I never dealt with, I'm going to get even with, I'm going to get them, they're going to pay. I never had to deal with any of that. As a result, I think my body was allowed to do that which only it can do so well. Human body is miraculous. The moment it's injured, it wants to heal. Now, I had so many helpful adjuncts, therapists, physical therapists, psychological therapists, psychotherapists, massage therapists, vocational therapists, etc. but every one of them really understood that they were adjuncts to what the body itself could do, and only the body can do. I think that that's one of the ways that I really helped myself, was being able to balance staying out of the way and then doing the work that I was told to do. Do my exercises, work my hands every day. My hands now can do what the therapist thought they would not be able to do.
Mm-hmm.
And only because I just did these exercises every day.
Plus, with the added benefit that because you no longer have fingerprints, you can commit crimes, right?
Well, that's going to be my next occupation in case I need it. Yeah, apparently the heat melted away the fingerprints. I have some very strange looking fingernails, but again, I'll admit that sometimes, especially in the beginning, I would look at my fingers and say, wow, these are really strange looking, the nails that I had left. But, on the other hand, and I don't say this lightly, I was in Singapore. I was on the operating table, already under anesthesia. My wife had signed the release to remove these two fingers,
Mm-hmm.
and the doctors began that surgery by scraping away the burnt tissue, expecting then to amputate these two fingers. And suddenly they came to a place where the finger was bleeding. And to the doctor, that was extraordinary, because if it's bleeding, then there's still life there. And I have those two fingers, so yeah, they may have some strange looking fingernails, but boy, I'll take 10 over 8 anytime.
Mm-hmm.
So
Now, you've said that your life, I think you've said that your life is actually better than it was before in some sense. And some people might think that, well, the very most you could hope for in your situation is to get back to the status quo ante, right? Like that would be the very definition of 100% recovery, is that you're feeling no worse about things than you did before the accident. So explain to us how it could be the case that even in light of the objectively speaking, limitations you have on some of your activities, and I assume some ongoing discomfort. How could it be that your life is actually better?
I think that what we have to realize is that we are very complex beings. We often try to characterize ourselves by one feeling or one action. Like we might say, I'm an angry person or I'm a kind person. But we're never always angry and we're never always kind. We're complex. So when I say that overall I think my life is better, I think that I have experienced any number of things because of this accident that I never could have experienced any other way. The level of love and support and caring, and I've had a good, fortunate life and a very good relationship, good family, etc. But I had never seen in my life anything like the support that we received after this accident. I've had opportunities that were never there before. My love as a teacher of meditation and Eastern philosophy is to try to reach people and to offer these ancient teachings and hope that they can be of benefit to people. Well, now more people want to hear about these things because I'm a curiosity. Doctors said I wouldn't live, and I live. I'm the same person inside, but I'm probably seen and heard differently. And some sacrifices, but I'm also 2.5 years older than I was, so who knows what changes would be happening anyway in the body. But
Yeah.
overall, if I were to take the whole picture, I would say that I would not go back. I'm also not saying that if I had known what would happen, that I would have got on the plane. No, that would be foolish. But it did happen, and I've learned how to benefit from the situation and to try to offer more. So overall, yes, I would say that from a broad perspective, I think my life is better than it was. You know, the doctor I mentioned in Kansas, the doctor who died of prostate cancer, he said the same thing. When he was close to his death, he said, I wouldn't go back.
Mm.
He said, I'm sorry for the pain and suffering that my wife will experience, but for what I have experienced going through this, approaching death, he said, I wouldn't give this back. It's too precious.
Mm.
And I agree.
Now, I can't escape the suspicion that even before you started meditating in the 90s, you were a somewhat upbeat person. I mean, were you not even before that relatively good at seeing the glass as half full?
Yes, probably most of the time. I come from a theatrical background.
Yeah, you were a singer, right?
Yeah, I came out of school and I went right into my first Broadway show, which happened to have been a hit, Oliver.
Mm-hmm.
Puts me way back there. And that was a great time. It was also mixed with the usual young actor singer's life, trying to get a job, trying to get your next employment, your next paycheck. But it was a great life. I did that for almost 30 years.
Mm.
I came from a difficult childhood, and I more and more think that that was probably an advantage because I had to learn how to overcome difficult things. And I did learn how to I wasn't thinking of it at the time, but I learned how to survive. And that's valuable. Probably, yes. I think that we are born with certain propensities, certain characteristics. We develop them. We look to change that which is not working well, the ways in which we've caused ourselves unnecessary suffering, cause others suffering. And if we work at that diligently, life can get better.
Mm-hmm.
I think mine has.
And I've got to think that disposition of yours was also an asset as you went through this.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely.
It,
My wife talks about, this is not for me to say, but she has spoken about it, that in my worst situation, let's say in Singapore, where things were pretty dire, that I was at many times taking care of the nurses, making sure they were okay, that their kids were okay. She said I was always kind to them.
mm-hmm.
And I feel good when I hear that. I would not have wanted that to be any other way.
Yeah, well, not being self-absorbed is a gift. This does raise the question, though, if you were an upbeat person before meditation, what led you to meditation? I mean, some people are led into meditation by acute suffering and ongoing suffering, and they find that it helps and they stick with it. I would say I think almost everyone is led to meditation because they're not 100% happy with the way things are. So what drew you into meditation?
The classic answer to that is, excuse me, that one is aware of one's suffering. I don't know that I was aware. I don't think I was. It may have just been curiosity. I met a fellow who was different than anyone I had ever met. I had that theatrical background. It was all upbeat and ego. And here was this fellow who was very calm, and there was just an inner joy about him that I had not experienced before. He didn't seem to need to prove anything. He just was present, delighted and delightful and calm. And I spoke with him about this. He told me about his meditation practice, and he told me that his teacher was coming to the United States to lead a retreat, asked me if I'd like to come along, and I thought, I had no idea what a retreat was.
Mm-hmm.
I mistakenly thought, oh, this would be fun, which of course was not the case at first. But that was when I met the Vietnamese monk Thich Nhat Hanh for the first time. And I got very involved in his community. I studied closely with him for 5 years. Then I wanted to work more in depth on my own practice. So it was difficult since he is in France a great deal of the time. So I sought out a teacher who I could really sit with and discuss things. And I was very fortunate to meet Sharon Salzberg and somehow convince her to do something she had not done before, which was to work one-on-one with someone.
Hmm.
And we did that for more than 10 years, where I would go every week and just sit with her and practice and ask my questions. Out of that grew my interest in writing about it. My first book was published in 2010. And then I told her one day that I really felt I wanted to start a meditation center. She said, "Why on earth do you want to do that?" She being one of the people in the world who had the experience of successfully doing it.
Mm-hmm.
And eventually I did it. I founded the Community Meditation Center here in New York, which is now thriving.
That's on the Upper West Side?
On the Upper West Side, we serve more than 100 people every Sunday, upwards of 20 to 30 on Wednesday evenings, and we're thriving. And it's, for me, it's a dream. I guess it's the dream that it has been most meaningful to me, to try to share these teachings with others. And the feedback that I get is that lives are being affected.
Mm-hmm.
What could be better?
Yeah. Well, what you got there with her, I think, is something that's hard to get, which is really regular direct feedback from a teacher. You can go to retreats and have a couple of conversations with a teacher for that 1 week, and I guess now there are more and more kind of online options, but in general, I think it's been hard for a lot of people to get a really good teacher that they can ask questions of, on a regular basis. So that's great.
Yeah, that's true, which is why when our Sunday sessions became as popular as they did, we added an evening so that people who wanted could be exposed to the teachings at least twice a week. The people in our community on their own created a telephone sangha, sangha being the word for community. 50 or so now get on the phone at the same time every morning, and they dial in, and they're not speaking with each other. They're being silent together for 20 minutes, but they know that the support of the other people is there. And I've made myself available to anyone in our community. I meet with people regularly, individually, and I know other teachers do the same thing.
Yeah. That will sound strange to people, but it is a fact that the sense that you are meditating with other people, a lot of people say that makes it easier to meditate.
Yeah, and it actually comes from a teaching of the Buddha. He referred to 3 jewels of his practice: the Buddha, the teacher himself, the Dharma, the teachings, and the Sangha, the community. Back at that time, it was referring to the community of noble beings who have walked this path before me. In other words, knowing that I'm not the only one trying to do this crazy thing, but many before me, noble beings, have done this. Today, we've expanded that definition so that Sangha, or community, refers to all of those, or even it's just one other person who we sit down and practice with. That support is significant. If you and I agreed that now, let's say for the next 5 mornings or 5 mornings a week, we will practice together, even if we're not in the same city, but we pick up the phone and I say to you, "Bob, hi, it's Alan, you ready?" Yes. We put the phone down. 20 minutes later, we ring a little bell and we say, "Thank you, see you tomorrow," even though it's not really see you, but I'll be
We're hearing you, for that matter.
Yeah, in other words, what's happening is you don't get off the hook. You're expecting me to be there.
That's part of it, the commitment.
Yeah, it's support.
Yeah. Okay, well, thank you. This has been fascinating. The book is Through the Flames, Overcoming Disaster Through Compassion, Patience, and Determination. And the Meditation Center is the Community Meditation Center in Manhattan, which you co-founded, I think, with your wife before this plane accident.
Yeah, we're 8 years old now.
All right. Well, congratulations on that. Congratulations on your recovery, and thanks very much for taking the time, Alan.
Thank you. It's my pleasure.
Take care.